He said it loud enough for the line to hear. He gets lost in the numbers. While the cashier's smirk cut sideways and the security guard's hand hovered over my worn canvas bag like I'd brought trouble instead of groceries. Under fluorescent ice, the belt dragged my wheat bread, my 10 planned items, while my scar from an old oven burn brightened against the cold, and I stood with my lighthouse tote, coupons aligned, receipt numbers memorized, a retired cook in a jacket that still smelled faintly of lemon soap and coffee grounds, watched by people with warm coats and quick cards who thought speed was virtue and patience was a defect. I am the man you walk past in a store and don't expect to hold a room. Until the oranges glow under the scale, the policy placard turns to face us, my granddaughter lifts her phone like a quiet lighthouse, and I ask for the procedure that evens the ground. Keep your eyes on my hands and on the paper, because before this receipt cools, the truth will have a number, and the smirk will have a lesson. Before I go on, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. If this speaks to you, share it. Awareness protects our elders. She said it right there at the counter, with the bags of oranges still sweating on the belt and the air a little too cold on my face. He gets lost in the numbers. The cashier's mouth tilted into a narrow smile, the kind that lifts one corner but not the other, and he glanced at my hands like he was clocking a shaky grip. The words slid under my skin and found the old scar on my forearm, the long pale line the oven gave me years ago when I pulled a tray too fast. Heat and cold met in the same place. I let my wallet rest on the black rubber, and for a second I watched the belt carry a loaf of wheat bread toward the red scanner, as if the bread understood where it needed to go better than I did. My scar didn't ache anymore, not in the usual way. It hummed. That's the truth. The market smelled like bleach and oranges, a clean sting with a sweet peel, and the lights overhead had that hard white color that makes everything look like paperwork. The belt whispered. The scanner waited. Beep if you'll let it. I didn't speak. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and brought out the envelope I'd prepared on the kitchen table, the one with the coupons stacked in order, corners aligned, and paper soft from my thumb. I set it beside my list, a single sheet with 10 lines and 2 columns, item and price forecast. 10 lines, no more, no less. I had cut a little notch on the top edge of the envelope so I could pull the first coupon with the pad of my finger without fumbling. The cashier raised his eyebrows like he'd been handed a homework assignment. Behind me the line breathed in one long, impatient rib. My granddaughter stood to my left, small and steady as a lamp you forget is on. She held my reusable bag, the one with a faded lighthouse printed on it, and watched my hands. I had told her on the ride over that cooking taught me to count by heat and weight, to trust sequences, to lay out steps and not skip. She nodded then and she nodded now, and I heard the quiet chime of her phone as she opened the notes app we had talked about. We don't argue in lines, sweetheart. We follow steps. That was the rule I had put in my head before we pushed the cart to the register. My daughter-in-law stood a little ahead of me, close enough to the card reader to pass for decision-making. She had taken my card from the tray in the cart when we pulled up, quick like she was doing me a favor, and said the thing that now stuck in the cold air between the three of us. He gets lost. Her hand hovered over the chip slot like a timer about to buzz. It was October outside and October inside, too. The market had a table of purple flyers near the entrance, a kind of reminder that some pains have schedules, and I felt the month on my skin even here, beneath the fluorescent ceiling and the beeps.
I put the list flat on the counter. Wheat bread, $3.29. 2% milk, $4.19. Oranges by the pound. Estimate $4.00. Coffee, the medium roast, on sale. Flour, 10-pound bag. Eggs, a dozen. Short, plain lines, each with a number I had checked against the shelf tags. 10 items. I slid the first coupon from the envelope with that notch I'd cut for speed, and I placed it above the bread. I asked for item-by-item verification, total forecast first, actual total after, and the coupon to be applied in order. My voice didn't move any louder than the belt. The cashier's smile hung a moment longer, then collapsed into the neutral face people wear when something official is happening and they can't name it yet. The store's sound folded around us, the low music with a drum that never quite resolved, the squeak of a cart that needed oil, the thrum of a cooler cycling on. Somewhere behind me, a baby gave one of those short pre-cries that test the air before the storm, and then settled. The cashier scanned the bread, and the first beep tore the silence cleanly. My granddaughter looked at her phone and tapped the predicted price on the note we'd prepared together at the table last night. The screen light brushed her cheekbone, soft as a night lamp. My daughter-in-law shifted her weight and cleared her throat. The cashier's fingers rested over the key that moved the belt forward. I asked for the milk next and reached for the second coupon, which I had clipped to a smaller scrap of paper with the list number 2 penciled on it. The paperclip was the silver kind that leaves a line if you use it too long, but I hadn't, and it slid off easily. The cashier avoided my eyes, but not my hands. He scanned, and the second beep struck a little sharper, like the machine wanted to speed me up by tone alone. I nodded toward the small sign posted at the far side of the counter, the one that always turns toward the wall because someone turns it, and caught a thin stripe of letters, something about verification upon request. My granddaughter saw it too and angled her phone, pretending to check our list while she snapped a photo for later, her thumbs quiet and quick. She didn't need to be told. That girl is a pocket witness. The belt tried to carry the oranges next, heavy in their net. I caught the bag with the side of my hand and set it on the metal plate of the scale. The scale gave a green pulse. The cashier flicked his eyes to the small screen near his elbow that showed the weight and price per pound, and then he tapped a button without looking all the way. The number appeared on his main display, and I felt my scar flicker, a memory of a hot tray, and the exact second precision is the only safety you've got. My daughter-in-law sighed in that careful public way that tells everybody she has been patient, but also tells them what the story is supposed to be. I traced the oranges line with my finger and read my forecast number to myself. My granddaughter moved a fraction closer. The bag handle looped over her wrist, and I smelled the light, clean soap she favors, lemony and faint. I could have said 100 things, 100 old man speeches about dignity and respect, about time and skill, about what I know and how I know it. But I didn't. I kept to the kitchen rule that saved me more than once. Count out loud to your own hands. Flour came next, and the bag thumped the counter like a small sack of memory. I felt again the weight of the 10-pounder I had lifted for decades, the way your palm learns to catch and turn without ripping the paper. The cashier scanned and the beep broke into 2 quick notes, a hiccup that meant the system wanted a manager's acknowledgement for the discount. He pressed a key that didn't belong to him. The screen flashed an amber border, like a tiny warning light, and then sat there, waiting for a badge that wasn't his. He pulled his hand back and finally looked me full in the face.
That look had a question in it, like he was just now deciding whether I was being difficult on purpose or simply old in the way people say old when they mean inconvenient. I folded the first 2 coupons into the envelope spine, slid out the third, and aligned it with the flower. I could feel the patience of the line behind me stretching thin, but not snapping yet. Someone coughed softly. The cooler cycled again. The music found the same 4 bars it always finds. The ceiling gave a dull, steady hum. I asked, without lifting my voice, for the supervisor to authenticate the discount and for the receipt to show the terminal number at the bottom. My granddaughter typed, "Supervisor requested, 4:17 p.m., register 3," into the note. My daughter-in-law's fingers twitched near the card reader. The cashier leaned toward the microphone at his station and pressed the call button with the flat pad of his thumb. He said the words he had to say in a tone that said he didn't want to say them. "Service at register 3, manager key for discount." While we waited, he tried to keep the line warm by sliding the next items forward, but I caught the motion with the heel of my hand and stilled the belt. "One at a time," I said, not because I needed the words, but because the words laid a track. My voice didn't carry beyond the counter. It didn't need to. The oranges still glowed in their net like stained glass. The flour sat on its side like a small white block, and the bread looked a little wrinkled where the belt had pressed it. The supervisor's steps came from somewhere behind the tobacco case, quick and clipped. She had the kind of face people learn to keep neutral when their shift is short-staffed. She set a small clipboard down by the card reader, tapped her badge against the scanner at the side of the register, and the screen opened a new window. I felt the temperature of the moment change, the way a kitchen changes when a timer dings and a door opens. My granddaughter angled her phone, capturing the time on the monitor. My daughter-in-law shifted again. The cashier's fingers hovered. I laid the list between us, line 3 pointing at the oranges, line 4 at the coffee, and line 5 at the flour. My forecast column waited. My granddaughter's note waited. The supervisor's badge made a soft chirp that was different from the beeps, a higher sound that suggested the system had blinked awake. The screen displayed a narrow field for authentication and a smaller line beneath for reason code. She clicked the reason code drop-down and paused. I saw the choices reflect in her glasses. Price adjustment, manager override, coupon validation, verification requested. I didn't breathe for a half second. The room felt clear. The line behind me quieted, like people were listening without wanting to admit it. The smell of oranges got stronger because the bag had opened a little at the top. The flour dusted my knuckles. The belt stood still under my palm, grainy and warm. The old scar on my arm didn't hurt. It remembered. I looked at the far right corner of the counter and noticed, for the first time, the small laminated policy placard half hidden behind a rack of gift cards, its heading tilted just enough that a few plain words entered the light. The placard was the plain kind, laminate curling a little at one edge, the font too small for anyone in a hurry. Verification available upon customer request. I eased it forward with 2 fingers, like shifting a saucepan just off the hottest part of the burner. The supervisor followed my gaze. Her badge chirped again, softer this time, and the drop-down on her screen hovered as if it could feel the heat of the moment. I could smell the oranges more clearly because the net bag had split near a knot, a clean citrus rush that cut through the bleach and cold air. The belt under my palm had the faint warmth of a motor that never gets to rest. The line pressed closer without moving. That's a trick some lines learn. People lean their attention in, and it changes the temperature. My granddaughter slid half a step toward me until her shoulder almost touched my sleeve, the lighthouse on the bag looking like it had turned its beam toward the counter. She tilted her phone so the timestamp filled a corner of the picture and, with a tiny movement of her thumb, saved it to a folder we had named in private. I felt tenderness move through me like a low current, not enough to shake me, enough to keep me standing. My daughter-in-law took another breath you could measure. She held my card in a way that telegraphed responsibility to the room, and I saw the cashier read it like a headline. The cashier's hands hovered over the keys. He tapped one by habit, then remembered the manager code, then lifted his hands again. The supervisor scanned the placard, glanced at my list with its 10 steady lines, and put the cursor on verification requested. Her mouth made a small decision before her finger did. The screen blinked. The blink was not a fix. It was a request. Enter password. The field waited. The room shifted in a tiny way because rooms know when something real is happening, even if no one has named it. Far back near the freezer cases, someone laughed at something on a phone, but here at register 3, the sound thinned out like steam over a sink of cold water. I felt the scar pull a little, not with pain, with memory. A long time ago, I learned that there are moments when you can protect yourself with steps, when holding to sequence is the only shelter available. The supervisor typed a slow 4-tap rhythm, and the screen accepted it with a muted tone. She added manager override and coupon validation, and the reason code populated both fields in a double row that reflected in her glasses. My granddaughter wrote those words down, not because she needed to, but because writing it fixes it in the world. The cashier tried to feed the next item under the scanner to speed the ritual, but I kept my palm on the belt. I wanted the sound of one beep following a note on a page I had already written, not the clatter of a handful thrown on a counter. The little humiliations piled up in the gaps between actions. A man 2 places behind sighed and checked his watch in a way meant to be seen. A woman whispered to the person with her and cut her eyes just past my ear. The security guard drifted into the end of the aisle and let his gaze rest on my canvas bag longer than on anyone else's cart. My daughter-in-law adjusted the strap of her purse and made careful space for herself right where decisions are supposed to stand. I could feel the room trying to place me in the category that makes rooms feel efficient. I stood exactly where I needed to stand and gave him the category I brought with me: documented, prepared, precise. I kept my mouth closed and let my hands talk. I laid coupon 3 by the flower, aligned its printed expiration with the line on my list, and touched the edge of the bag so a little cloud of soft dust lifted into the light. The supervisor placed her finger near a button labeled Verify and didn't press it. She looked at the scale, at the oranges, at the coffee can waiting like a red metal drum with a paper skin. She looked at the small placard again, as if it had surprised her by existing. The cashier stared at the space where the belt met the counter, a thin seam of rubber and brushed steel. He looked like a person who wants a timer to go off so he can pull the thing from the oven and be right. I could hear my own breath now, not loud, slow and steady, with a tiny scrape at the top that I get when the air is this cold.
October has its own sound in my boons. In my head, I counted out the steps the way I used to call tickets on a line. Forecast, scan, verify, apply, record. My granddaughter matched me from her side, not with numbers, but with attention. The lighthouse on the bag looked faded and brave. The list waited. The envelope waited. The people waited. Waiting is a shape, and we were all inside it.
When the supervisor finally pressed verify, the register gave a different tone, higher and cleaner than the beeps. A small window opened with a green border that asked for wheat confirmation. The oranges sat pretty and correct on the plate, glowing like they had their own light. The cashier tapped the confirm key, and for just a second, the screen showed the unit price and a total that matched the number I had written before leaving my kitchen. The supervisor saw me see it. She tapped again, and the window closed. The display returned to its list view, a long gray column with a stubby scroll bar. The moment passed like a bubble popping. The pressure came back immediately, filling the space the truth had occupied for half a breath. A new customer clipped a line separator on the belt with a percussive snap that sounded like annoyance shaped into plastic. The overhead speaker crackled out a call for someone in produce, and no one answered for a beat too long. The cashier straightened, pushed the coffee can forward with his knuckles, and I could tell he was about to scan it in one motion with the cereal box that had drifted too close. I eased the cereal back, one thing at a time. The coffee smelled like morning in quiet rooms. The can felt cool and rolled a little under my palm. My daughter-in-law shifted again. Her shoulders squared. The card held its place like a ticket already punched. She did not speak, but everything about her posture suggested that the system was on her side by default. The security guard's radio hissed a private word that I couldn't catch. My granddaughter wrote the time down again because she notices when patterns begin to repeat. She is 13 and the kind of brave that looks like patience to people who don't know how to see it. I have seen it. I rely on it now the way a cook relies on a timer you trust with your name. We reached the point where the flour's discount needed the badge again. The amber border flashed in a thin rectangle. The supervisor leaned in, the way you lean into steam to see if it's time to turn off the flame. She tapped the badge. The chirp came. The window opened to ask for the same password, and I felt the weight of it, that deliberate second asking, like a hand on a shoulder that says we're really doing this. The cashier's jaw shifted. He wasn't the enemy. He was a person caught between a clock and a policy he had never had to look at this closely. The room still wanted to be fast. My hands still wanted to be exact. I let a memory move through me, not of kitchens or burns, but of clinics and little windows with glass and numbers called out of order, of forms that were accepted only if the ink matched a shade of blue you had to buy at the right store, of office doors half closed that said the staff was at lunch when you could hear someone talking on the other side. October collects these moments. It hangs them where you might see them when you were trying to buy bread. I breathed once and let the air out slow. My granddaughter touched my sleeve with the barest brush of knuckle to fabric, an anchor small as a pin. I anchored back. The supervisor typed again. The password took. She turned the placard so the words faced us and not the rack of gift cards. She could have left it where it had been, shadowed by plastic balloons and seasonal candy, but she didn't. The cashier slid the coffee under the scanner, and the beep had the same pitch as the first one, except I didn't hear it like a command now. I heard it like a note in a song that's decided to be steady. Then the speaker above us clicked alive with a call that wrapped our small moment into the store's whole body. Manager to front end for audit mode. Register 3. My granddaughter's thumb made a note of those exact words. I didn't move, except to rest my palm more completely on the belt.
The manager call hung there like the smell of oranges, bright and undeniable. The security guard turned his head. The woman who had whispered before stopped mid-syllable. My daughter-in-law's fingers tightened just enough to change the color of her knuckles. The cashier looked at the supervisor, and the supervisor looked toward the tobacco case where footsteps had appeared the last time. Nothing moved for a breath. Then someone behind the service desk answered a phone and began speaking quickly, a murmur that had formula in it. The market felt like the minute before a timer rings, when the cake is either perfectly set or still raw in the middle, and you can't open the door to check. I kept my eyes on the screen because the screen had no feelings to push on me. It showed a field I had never seen as a shopper, a small box labeled Authorization, with a blinking cursor waiting for a code no one had typed yet. The blinking seemed louder than the music, louder than the cooler, louder than anything. The supervisor's badge rested by her hand. The placard sat fully visible. The line leaned in. My granddaughter's note showed the time, the words audit mode, the little lighthouse bag, the oranges in our net. Then the register flashed a red strip across the top and asked for the manager's code. The red strip at the top of the screen looked like a thin cut that refused to close. Manager code required. The words held still, but they pressed on the room anyway. I felt the cold air from the doors roll in and skim the hair on my hands, and for a second I could smell both the bleach from the floors and the bitter brightness of the coffee can I steadied with my palm. My scar vibrated the way a pan hums when you set it on a burner and the flame is barely there, the metal remembering heat more than feeling it. My granddaughter tightened the lighthouse bag strap around her wrist, then eased it again, a gentle loop, like she was tying me to the counter in case the floor tried to move. The line behind me shifted without advancing. Shoes turned slightly outward, the signal of people ready to pivot away if they could tell the story to themselves in a way that kept them good and me to blame. The cashier's fingers hovered over the keys as if posture alone could type the missing code. He didn't meet my eyes. He glanced at my daughter-in-law, at the card she still held like a good deed everyone should notice, and then at the supervisor, who stood with her badge resting near her knuckles, the placard finally facing outward where policy could see itself. Sound came in layers, the cooler's low thrum, the overhead speaker's breath between announcements, a squeaky wheel further down an aisle, drawing an invisible line and erasing it at the same time. The fluorescent lights hissed in a way I could only hear when I forced my shoulders down and let my breath settle. October has a sound in these places, a mix of good intentions and old dust, and I heard it float over the purple flyers that had greeted us when we walked in. My granddaughter checked the note again and wrote, Register 3, Manager Code Requested, 4:22 p.m., in that tidy print she uses for science class. She didn't fidget. She didn't huff. She stood steady and close, a small warm counterweight to the cold air. The lighthouse on the bag looked like it had been painted with breath more than ink, soft at the edges, still pointing at the belt. That bag has seen rain and car trunks and the edge of more than one metal cart. It looked like it knew where we were. The cashier tried to clear the error with a soft key that did nothing but nudge the red strip lower so it could rise again. The supervisor pressed the intercom and said something that started with manager and ended with audit mode, the exact phrase that had hung in the air a minute ago. I could feel eyes on my shoulder blades, eyes on the back of my neck, eyes on the lighthouse bag. The security guard took one step closer to the mouth of the aisle and rested his hand near his radio like a man waiting for the weather to decide. My daughter-in-law's chin lifted a degree. She had learned the language of public patience, the kind that says, I'm helping here, even when the help takes something away.
I tapped the list with my finger once, the tip of my nail on the number 8 like a metronome click. We had matched 7 items, 3 to go. The oranges sat on the plate and one had pushed its way against the net so a small arc of peel was free. Citrus cut through the air in a bright line, and the smell reached me before the supervisor turned to check the scale again. I thought of the way steam used to cloud my glasses when I opened a heavy oven door and how I learned to angle my head so the first blast went past me and not through me. You can make space for a heat you did not ask for. You can teach your body to wait wisely. The manager didn't appear yet. The red strip told us he hadn't. The intercom crackled like it wanted to produce a person and could only manage a sound. Somewhere near frozen food, a cart bumped a low shelf and a small, hollow plastic clatter rolled out and died. The cashier's jaw set hard, then softened. His eyes flicked to the clock icon at the corner of the screen. He had a job that worshipped seconds. I had a life that learned to count 'em. My granddaughter leaned in just enough for me to feel her shoulder touch the fabric of my jacket. That touch grounded me the way a hand on a wooden spoon does when you need to keep a pot from catching. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her phone screen dimmed and she brightened it with a thumb press. The tiny bloom of light reflected for a blink in the silver ring around the scanner glass. She had written down the words on the placard, too. Verification available upon customer request. It looked like law inside the narrow frame of her notes. The little humiliations kept themselves small but visible. A man sighed with his whole coat. A woman moved the divider bar like she was drawing a line through a name. The guard's gaze crawled over the seams of my canvas bag, the way you look at a thing that might be a problem before you let it become a person's property. The cashier rolled the coffee can a quarter turn, like he was trying to find its best face for the scanner, and the metal whispered against the steel. My daughter-in-law held the card with care, closer to her than to me, and it read like a caption under a photograph. Capable. The supervisor cleared her throat and looked down the front lane toward the tobacco case again. Her badge caught the light and blinked a little spot on the metal frame of the register. It made me think of the tiny flicker a pilot light gives when it steadies. That's all I wanted from this moment. Steady. The system wanted spectacle or speed. I wanted steps. 7 correct so far, 3 to go. Each with its own shape, each with its coupon resting in the envelope. Third finger notch ready, paper soft where my thumb had trained it. I let my eyes soften and let the whole frame come into view. The belt's grain, the coffee's red. The oranges pressing light into their own skin. The flowers fine dust on the edge of the counter. The placard standing like a small door open toward us. The list with my numbers and my letters. My own hands, dark and steady. The scar, an old riverbed under winter sun. I felt the hum of old ovens and remembered how precision had kept me from worse burns than the one I carry. Precision is a kindness you give yourself when the room doesn't. A boy at the end of the lane asked his mother a question, and she said, "Not now," in that careful way that actually means be quiet. I wasn't angry at any of them. My anger had edges, but not points. It took the shape of a box lid laid over something hot to keep the heat where it belongs. The manager's footsteps finally sounded like actual steps instead of theories. Not fast, not slow, just real. They moved past the displays of candy, past the rack of gift cards, and stopped where the light from the register screen made a pool on the counter.
He was a tall man with a badge that hung on a lanyard and a face trained to apologize to the air without using the word. He looked at the red strip. He looked at me. He noticed my granddaughter's phone, then looked back at the supervisor's hand near the badge scanner. The cashier's shoulders dropped a fraction when the manager nodded at him,
a tiny permission to exist in this space without choosing sides. The manager reached for the badge reader and then stopped. He glanced at the placard like a person checking a recipe he pretends to know by heart. I pointed to my list, to the forecast column, to the empty spaces that waited for the last 3 numbers. I didn't make it a speech. I kept it as short as a direction you need to be followed exactly. Item by item, verification, coupons applied in order, receipt with terminal number, split totals. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. His hands were clean, nails short, a small white half-moon of cuticle dry on one thumb. He tapped the badge against the reader and the register answered with a small chirp that told the room something official had entered it. The screen blinked to a field for code. He typed with 2 hands, a careful, even pace, not the hunting peck of a person who only pretends to know the keys. The sound of his typing was soft as flour fallen onto a counter. My granddaughter recorded the time again. The security guard adjusted his belt with 1 finger, and the radio hissed like a secret being told over and over until it loses its meaning. The red strip steadied while the characters filled the box. You learn to read a machine's breathing. This one inhaled. Then it asked for a reason code, just like before, and the manager hovered there. And in his hesitation, I felt the whole room lean the other way. The supervisor looked at him. The cashier stared at the scanner like he could force it to be done. My daughter-in-law lifted the card a half-inch as if she might insert it by pure will if the system ever gave her the slot. My granddaughter's thumb stopped. The room balanced between a yes and a no in the way a cake balances in the pan before you turn it out. I let the quiet ride. I let October be October. I thought of old windows and small offices, of nods that mean go ahead and shrugs that mean wait your turn, of doors that open when you bring a form they didn't think you had. I kept my palm on the belt so I could feel the slow warmth of the motor and know we were still here together, all of us, in this small, bright island of rules. The oranges breathed their clean scent. The coffee held its low bitterness. The flour dusted the edge of the counter where my sleeve had just been. The manager finally chose verification requested and coupon validation with his index finger, and the cursor landed in the field that would allow us to continue. That was when the security guard took 1 step forward and reached for my canvas bag. I didn't move. My granddaughter did not either. She only lifted her chin a fraction and tapped the word recorded on her phone, and I felt the choice rise in me like heat beneath a pan I refused to leave unattended. I kept my voice level, and I kept my hand steady, and I turned just enough to see the service desk where the worn spine of a thick, ruled book sat under the counter lip like a quiet piece of weathered wood. Bring the incident book to Register 3. If this is reaching you, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and send it to a friend who cares. The guard's hand paused above the canvas, then withdrew an inch as if my words had turned the fabric into something with a small boundary around it. The manager's eyes moved from the bag to the service desk, and a nod made its quiet way down the lane. The clerk at the desk lifted the thick ruled book from beneath the counter lip and carried it over with both hands, the cover worn smooth at the corners where fingers had learned to hold it. The book had a faint scent of dust and ink, the kind of smell that reminds a person of waiting rooms and numbered tickets. It landed beside the register with a soft, serious weight.
My granddaughter stepped closer so her shoulder touched my sleeve. I could feel the warmth of her through the jacket, a simple human anchor in the cold light. She set the lighthouse bag at her feet and kept her phone steady, not high, not obvious, just ready for timestamps and small truths. The supervisor rolled a pen between her fingers, then opened the book to the page of the day. The paper had the thin blue veins of a ledger and the date in the corner. I asked that the header reflect exactly where we stood: register number, time, request for verification upon customer request, audit mode engaged. The pen scratched a neat path. The manager's badge chirped once more against the reader, and the red strip at the top of the screen steadied into a narrow bar that no longer shouted. We closed the first loop of the afternoon right there. The guard, still at the mouth of the lane, adjusted his stance. He looked at my canvas bag and then at the book where the supervisor's writing angled forward with purpose. He spoke softly into his radio, short words, functional, and then rested his hand on his belt rather than the bag. The cashier's shoulders lowered by a finger's width. He rearranged a coffee can so its label faced the scanner, no longer eager, now careful. My daughter-in-law held the card near the reader and looked at the placard that finally faced us like a rule remembered. We returned to the list and the work of finishing what we'd begun. 7 items checked, 3 remaining, each with a shape I knew before I left my kitchen. I set coupon 8 above the cereal that had hovered at the edge of the belt. The manager chose verification requested in the reason field and glanced at the scale, then at the display where values waited to be confirmed in their proper order. The soundscape shifted toward function. Beep, then a higher chirp for the manager's confirm, then the soft roll of the receipt tape inside its housing like a breath behind a door. The cereal matched what I had written. My pen, a plain black one from the drawer where we keep rubber bands and birthday candles, rested in my pocket, but I kept the tally with my finger on the paper, a touch that counted. The oranges were next in the queue, but the scale had already given them a quiet green earlier. The screen returned to that weight confirmation with a small window along its edge. I looked at my forecast, then at the unit price, then at the total. Exact. The supervisor keyed the confirmation, and I asked that the receipt show the terminal number at the bottom. She nodded and made a note in the margin of the book, a reference to the request. It felt like fitting a lid to a pan that finally sat flat. The guard drifted a step closer, not toward my bag now, but toward the edge of the counter where the book lay. He read the last line the supervisor had written and tapped his radio twice. He remained a presence without becoming a pressure. That was enough. People behind us adjusted their weight from foot to foot, but the sharpness had dulled. The annoyance that had shaped itself into size lost its edges. The room's impatience made room for the next correct step. We reached the 9th item. The discount required the badge again. The manager's hands moved with that careful pace I trust in people who are used to being watched without being seen. He authenticated. The amber borders softened. The cashier's fingers finally matched the rhythm. Scan, confirm, pause. The sound of the cooler in the back of the aisle lined up with it. You get used to rhythms in kitchens, to the way a clock and a blade and a flame talk to each other. That conversation was happening here now, in fluorescent light, on brushed steel. My daughter graduated the time and wrote "Manager Present" beside it in her own shorthand. Her concentration had a quiet shine to it. The lighthouse on the bag looked like a small painting of steady. She adjusted her stance so she could see the screen without blocking the view for anyone else. She didn't declare herself a witness. She became one by standing in the right place with her eyes open. I felt a pride that didn't puff me up. It settled me.
The pen resumed its gentle crawl across the book's paper. The supervisor added the words "Policy placard made visible at customer request." And under that, audit mode engaged for item-by-item verification. The handwriting wasn't pretty, but it was legible. It had the unvarnished honesty of a kitchen list on a busy night. The manager added his initials in a square block that matched the name on his lanyard. The book
the placard, the screen, 3 corners of a triangle that held the moment together. We paused long enough to let air move through us. The overhead speaker issued a call for someone in produce that didn't concern us, and it slid past like traffic beyond a window. The cashier looked at the small pile of coupons that had been applied and the 2 that remained. His face had lost the smile that had started all this and found a neutral expression that fit his job better. My daughter-in-law shifted the angle of the card in her hand. I could read her posture without bitterness. She stood where she was used to standing. Today, the place shifted a few inches. That is not a defeat, it is a correction. The 10th item waited, a simple thing with a simple discount. I placed the last coupon beside it and rested my palm on the belt. The motor's warmth hummed under my skin. The manager's keystrokes were steady enough to be almost invisible. The verification window appeared. The number in the box reached up to meet the number in my forecast column. I did not let the satisfaction reach my mouth. I let it sit behind my ribs where it could do its work without showing off. The supervisor watched the screen and then wrote one more brief line in the book. 10th item verified prior to totalization. That phrase had the clean taste of water. We had closed the subplots without a speech. The guard was no longer a hand above a bag. He became a witness by presence and notation. The cashier was no longer an eyebrow and a smile that cut sideways. He became hands that scanned in the order the policy allowed. The placard was no longer a shy rectangle turned toward a rack of gift cards. It stood where it could be read. The book was no longer a tired object under a counter. It bore the day's truth in ink. Even the air changed. The cold at the front doors kept rolling in, but it met something warmer in us and took a softer shape. I asked quietly for the split receipts to be prepared once we reached the end. One for me, with the items and numbers I had brought in my head and on my page, and one for the person who came with me, separated by barcode and quantity so each total had a home. The request went into the book in the same steady hand. The cashier cued the function on the register with a small icon I had never noticed before. 2 pages side by side. The manager nodded once. This was not a favor, it was a feature. I looked down the lane one more time and let the place settle into a single picture. The oranges shining through their net, the coffee can resting like a solid promise. The flour bag collapsed a little at the top where it had been set and reset. The list with its 2 columns and the quiet relief of matching numbers. The envelope with its paper notch, empty now except for the thin weight of preparation that had done its job. My granddaughter's phone with its timestamps and clip notes. The book with its lines and initials. The placard facing the people it was meant to face. We stood at the edge of the total, the moment in a kitchen when the timer hasn't rung, but you can smell the doneness coming. I rested my palm on the counter, feeling the fine grit of flour and the cool smoothness of steel under it. I didn't need to control anything. I needed to attend. The room had moved from pressure to procedure, from speed to sequence. The small humiliations had been gathered and put where they belong, not on a person, but on the neglect of steps. The manager took his hands off the keyboard and let them rest on either side of the register, a posture that signaled completion of a phase without claiming victory. The supervisor closed the pen and left it on the open book like a bridge between what had been written and what would be signed next. The guard rolled his shoulders once, as if letting go of a tension he hadn't named. My daughter-in-law held the card less tightly and looked at the screen not as a verdict, but as a tool. I breathed in the citrus and coffee and the mild metallic scent of the scanner's glass warming under the lights. I breathed out slow, the way I do when a cake rose evenly and the oven held its temperature, and the next step is to open the door without slamming the air. My granddaughter's shoulder was still against my sleeve.
The lighthouse on the bag kept its beam pointed at the counter. The belt stood still, waiting for only one command. When I lifted my finger toward the total button, the room felt ready, and so was I. I pressed the total button, and the screen woke into a clean blue that held all our small decisions in one place. The numbers climbed and settled, one row after another, until the final line appeared, centered and unapologetic. It matched my forecast to the cent. There was no drama in the way the truth arrived. It simply took the space it had been denied. I felt the air change along the front end, the way a kitchen changes when the first plate lands in the pass, and everyone knows the rhythm has been found. I didn't smile. I set my fingertip on the paper tape where it fed under the clear shield, and I watched the printer lay down ink. The register hummed like a small fan in a quiet room. The total printed, then the terminal number. The cashier read the number aloud, not to me, to the air, as if he had been doing it all day and would continue forever. The supervisor nodded and made a final note in the book to reflect the verification sequence and the confirmation of the total. My granddaughter's phone captured the last timestamp and the narrow hiss of the receipt sliding out, then went still in her hand. I asked for the split receipts. The manager reached for the function with a familiarity I hadn't seen in him an hour ago. He selected the items I had designated on my list for each slip, and the screen presented the totals like two flat stones set side by side. The printer breathed twice. Two slips emerged with their own neatly separated sums, each bearing the terminal number and the time. He laid them on the counter with care, one angled toward me, one toward my daughter-in-law. The card reader woke with a soft chime that sounded less like permission and more like acknowledgement. My daughter-in-law slid my card back to me without touching my fingers. She held her own card above her slip and hesitated. The cashier did not prompt her. The supervisor did not hurry her. The room had shifted out of their hands. She inserted the card, and the small screen asked for confirmation in its square, even font. She read the number twice, then pressed the green button. The reader chirped, and the slip waited for her signature that no longer claimed responsibility for both of us, only for what was hers. She signed, handed it back to the cashier, and stepped a fraction aside. It was not surrender. It was the correct shape of care. For mine, I folded the card wallet open, slid the chip in, and waited for the second chime. The keypad asked me to confirm a total I knew by heart, because I had written it in my kitchen when the sun was over the sink. I touched the button. The receipt printed. I held it in my hand and felt the heat of the paper. I waited for the prompt to remove the card. The reader flashed "Thank you," and the tiny green light on the corner blinked twice. That was the whole thing. 2 lights, 1 number, 1 paper, 2 hands.
The manager cleared his throat and angled his body so he faced the line as well as our counter. He spoke in a voice meant to be heard without traveling past 4 registers. He apologized for the delay by describing the process we had followed, the policy we had applied, and the reason we would see the placard positioned prominently at every lane from now on. He didn't use the word sorry. He used the words we will and from now on, and the titles of the documents that guided us. He asked the supervisor to replace any placards turned toward the wall, and to remind staff in the next huddle that verification upon request is not a courtesy, it is procedure. The cashier stood a little straighter, the way a person does when someone pulls a coat from his shoulders that he didn't know he was wearing. He looked at the monitor, and then at me, and then at the book. He didn't look away from himself with a joke or a shrug. He asked if I wanted the receipt folded or left whole, and when I said whole, he aligned the edges like he was aligning the corners of a sheet pan with a rack. He placed it in my palm. His hands no longer hovered, they completed. The supervisor wrote the last line in the book with the pen's point firm on the paper. Item by item verification conducted at customer request. Total confirmed. Split receipts provided. Terminal number announced. Policy placard repositioned. Staff to be briefed. She initialed the line. The manager added his name in block letters. The book did not feel symbolic to me. It felt like a surface you could set something heavy on without it cracking. The security guard, who had been a shadow at the edge of my attention, took a small step forward and addressed the manager and the supervisor. He said he would include in his log that a customer's bag was not to be handled without specific cause, and that observation is not suspicion. He did not announce it to the lane. He kept his voice low and even. He made the point to the two people who could turn it into practice. The manager nodded and asked him to add his timestamps. The guard said he had them. The movement that had threatened to become a search retreated into a note that now constrained the next impulse like a lid over heat. I looked at my granddaughter. Her shoulder rested against my sleeve the way a bird rests on a branch when the wind drops. Her face was quiet. She did not grin or give me any sign meant for the crowd. She simply offered me the lighthouse bag and asked if I wanted her to carry the flour or the oranges. I told her oranges. She slipped the net over her arm so the bright fruit lay against her jacket like a garland made for someone who had run a race a long time ago and still knew how to finish. My daughter-in-law adjusted the strap on her purse and looked at the placard one more time. Her mouth flattened into the shape of a thought she would have in the car, not here. That was enough. She stepped aside to let me take my receipt and my bag. She did not reach for my card. She did not offer to lead me anywhere. She stood for a second where I had stood an hour earlier, trying to draw a line through the air with posture alone. Posture does not change rules. Rules change posture. We had found them and faced them and written them down. The overhead speakers played a soft guitar progression I recognized from the early evening cleanup in the kitchen where I used to work. It sounded like the moment when the last pan is soaked and the smell of onions is replaced by the smell of steel cooling. The market air still had bleach in it, but the bleach smelled less like hiding now and more like ready. I tucked my receipt into my wallet and closed it with a snap I have always liked, a small closure that tells your fingers the job has an ending.
The manager asked the cashier to call out the terminal number for the next 2 customers, at least, to set a habit. The cashier did it in the even tone of a person who had learned something and did not feel smaller for having learned it. The supervisor moved down the row and turned the remaining placards to face the lanes. A small boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at the oranges on my granddaughter's arm. He whispered a question I couldn't hear. His mother nodded and dragged her finger lightly across the mesh to make a soft, rasping sound that made the boy laugh. That was the sound I carried with me toward the doors. The cold rolled in again, and this time it met a warmer surface in me and dissipated without taking anything I needed. I felt none of the heaviness I had felt when I stepped to the counter. I felt the kind of tired that means you used your body and your mind exactly the way they were built to be used. The lighthouse on the bag looked a little brighter in the late afternoon light. I pushed the door with my shoulder, and the rubber mat gave under my heel with the soft give of a good kitchen mat, a promise that some surfaces are meant to support, not to trip. At the cart corral, I stopped and laid the receipt across my palm. The numbers were clean and simple. I could have taken a picture. I did not. I let the ink cool on the paper like a cake cooling in a pan, held but complete. My granddaughter stood beside me and breathed a little cloud into the October air. She looked at the purple flyers near the entrance, then back at me. I nodded to let her know I saw them too. Some months ask you a question you answer with method, not volume. I handed her the flour bag and took the oranges, trading weights so we walked even. My daughter-in-law stood a half step behind, quiet. She looked from the receipt to the door and back again. We walked to the car with the simple rustle of paper and the pale squeak of the cart's wheel, marking time. When we reached the trunk, I set the oranges down and felt the net press back against my fingers, not as resistance, as confirmation. I closed the trunk and stood very still for one breath. The market doors slid open and closed like lungs you can see through glass. The evening gathered itself over the lot. I slid the receipt into my wallet and pressed my fingers against the leather. I did not think of speeches or revenge or the right words I hadn't said. I thought of steps, each one taken in order, each one holding a small part of my dignity in place. I turned toward my granddaughter and the person who had come with us and kept my voice low. I said we were done here. Then I walked to the driver's side, set my hand on the cool metal, and felt that I belonged to myself. Dignity is a habit, and habits can be taught. If this meant something to you, like and subscribe, and in the comments, tell me your choice in a moment like this. See you soon!